And thank you very much indeed, Jennifer Nissen-Philpott, who has really spoken about the critical role the churches have to play, and really how she has spent her time imploring governments to pay attention. So just before we go to Jerry Ford for some of the questions that have been arriving in, and there have been quite a few arriving in, just to remind us, I suppose, at the very beginning, where Abigail kind of really spoke about how difficult a topic this is and how it had very little attention thus far. Sister Bridget and Sister Mary Delargy showed us the image of the River Nile and spoke about the lack of dignity and the lack of compassion that seems to persist around this issue. And they also said, and there was a particular line that struck me from the reflection where it said, "May fear, apathy, and opposition not deter us from action." And then after that, we saw the BBC film that introduced Dr. Shane Duffy. And the one line that stuck with me from that was, I stay inside on my own. And then Dr. Shane Duffy gave us some facts and figures that were unbelievable, really. 2 million sufferers with 15,000 surgeries per year, which is vastly, if you like, there seems to be such a need that we're not nearly meeting the need at all, and that the cost, although significant, is not huge. And he also welcomed the Safe Birth for All campaign. Tony gave us some real life stories of people that she met when she traveled to Angola. She spoke to us about the Votoka, the Rise Up group that she worked with. She read to us from Cutting for the Stone, that powerful line, "The world was lost to her and her to it." Many of the stories that Tony referenced were indeed quite difficult, I suppose, and quite moving. But she also mentioned the human rights aspect that was touched on by Jennifer in the last piece. And she spoke of the critical role that churches have to play. And she spoke too of Moira, who was a 21-year-old obstetric fistula sufferer for 6 years, who was a farmer in early pregnancy and had many early pregnancies, and that this gave rise to us. In all of what we've heard tonight, there has been a call to raise a greater awareness. I've learned an awful lot more. I knew so little, and I think some of us in the AEFGN have already said that we know so little about this, that this is just the start of a campaign that we're hoping to build upon this, so that what we do next will certainly kind of add to our knowledge and perhaps create a greater awareness. So before we begin to figure out what might our call to action might be, I'm going to invite Jerry Ford. Jerry, if you would come in there, please, and maybe you might be able to call on one or two questions that people have asked. And unfortunately, because Jennifer's not here, we were hoping that either Tony or Dr. Shane, who's still with us, might be able to answer any of the questions that are posed. So Jerry, can you hear me?
Yeah, thanks very much, Brian.
Go ahead.
There are a good number of questions came in. Well, the first one, it says, apologies, but I did not follow something. Given the significant number of women who suffer from this complication, why does it happen in the first place? Is it simply because the care they receive during labor isn't good enough, or are there other factors causing this problem? And the second part of this question is, would there have been a problem in a country like Ireland in the past, wherever a woman gave birth at home? And the person said, I've never heard of it in an Irish context. So maybe that's more for Shane, I think.
I would think so.
Yeah, that's fine. Yes, it exists everywhere. And it's not just related to where a baby kind of is in the pelvis and it gets obstructed, which happens in 6% of all pregnancies. So if people can't access midwives and obstetricians who can identify that the labor is obstructed, then that's the biggest problem. And then if people can't access cesarean sections, that's another problem. And then when the obstructed labor happens, we can prevent the tissues dying by putting a catheter in for 7 days afterwards as well. So there's a whole range of things that can happen. In Ireland, it does happen. In England, we have 120 cases every year, which we have 700,000 patients delivering per year here. So it's not an awful lot, but it does happen in every society, but more so where people can't access healthcare or healthcare professionals.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And next we got a comment, and the comment was, "It strikes me that some of us men need to exercise greater respect for women. There is a need to learn the big difference between lust and control, and to show love and deep appreciation of women and their right to say no." So that is a comment from. Then we have another question, maybe also for Dr. Shane. Are there any long-term effects from the surgery on women? And if there are, what supports are there for women in dealing with these effects?
So it's terrible to say this, but the fistula is only one part of the trauma. So most patients that present, they will have had this for many years. It hasn't been treated. So they've been shunned from their communities, from their families. Their husbands will have left them. And also, in many cases, the baby will have died during pregnancy. So the legacy will always be there. The memory will always be there. And all the drama that happened as a result of that complicated pregnancy will continue. And repairing the hole can achieve continence in most cases. When the hole is by a certain part of the bladder, they can be left with some leakage. But in general, the surgery does restore their continence and ability to stop leaking. But that's just one part of the healing process. And as a surgeon, I'm always mindful, it's easy to repair the hole, but all the other stuff that goes with care and psychological, physical, and spiritual health I don't get to deal with all of that. And that's where I suppose an integrated program is very important. Sorry, I can waffle on a bit much.
No, thank you very much. Then another comment from Michelle. She said she's glad that there was mention of the Thursdays in Black campaign. As she said, it's something that has been supported via the OLA social media for years. And as Jennifer stated, it's a simple yet powerful piece of advocacy that continues to grow. So maybe it's something we can also do in our organizational platforms as well. So thanks for that comment, Michelle. Then moving on, another question, and there's a follow-up question to this as well, I think. Thank you very much for this hugely informative and engaging webinar. Surely prevention is best. And with that in mind, what is the extent to capacity or the willingness of nurses and midwives to train in helping prevent a fistula or fistulas in order to assist their local communities? Is it part of nursing training at all? And I'm not sure who can answer that. Maybe it's Dr. Shane again, you're in the medical profession here.
Yeah, no, I'm fine. I'm sure there's some midwives on, so please interrupt me if there are, or nurses from not just the kind of where I am from, but from local areas. So I will maybe start if that's okay. But yes, unfortunately, patients who deliver at home births, who don't have access to skilled professionals to be able to identify the obstructed labor. When people access midwives or doctors, they're trained to be able to identify these patients and deal with them. So it can be sorted. There's something called a partogram, which we all use as midwives and doctors, and it kind of tells us what's normal and abnormal. And that's an important part of care in that a midwife and, dare I say, an obstetrician. And I can just see Petra, who's just texted. Maybe Petra, I might hand over to you if you want to just clarify and make sure.
You might unmute there, Petra, and show and.
Okay.
Thank you indeed for coming in. You might tell us what you said in your comment there, and anything you can add to Shane's description there would be wonderful.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm very thankful for this webinar. I never have been part of a webinar, so I didn't know what to expect. But it's very interesting, can learn a lot from it. And I'm very excited, very thankful, because we had this visit in January and was a very big encouragement. And going about this question, we started from 2018 in Lubango. where I was in that time, we started training nurses. We went health post by health post, and then they continued, and I left and went to another province. And I can say, like, now we have trained three provinces. They have been giving training in a province, and then the government brings all the nurses from all the different health posts, and then we teach about, like, what is obstetric fistula, how you can prevent it, and if you know any patients, please bring them to us. And our experience was that people were, like, shocked. Like, if I would teach about, like, how long is a birth, they wouldn't know that it is not longer than 12 hours. So if people, like, we found out with our patients, like the medial, they have like 2.5, 3 days birth. So then the baby is always died, and all the problems started because the head have been stuck there, and yeah, the bladder is broken, and then after that they lose urine. So, but when we teach, we see that people are very open for it, but it's just the lack to get it into the teaching system, that all the nurse schools are going to get this teaching about obstetric fistula, and also, like, you know, then how to deal with it, because that is the thing. If you have the province Quito, that the BA, the Quito where they went to visit, in that province is twice Holland, and there's one hospital to do cesarean. So imagine, and the farthest health post is 7 hours drive. So if that birth is not going well, so the idea working through churches is very good idea, because if we teach the churches, and I tell the churches, listen, we have to make sure that all the women come to the capital, where it is the hospital for the cesarean, and then the government gets overwhelmed and they think, like, uh-oh, we have to do something. So, I mean, we are trying to teach like that, but I think there's very much interest for nurses to learn about it. But it is just a long process for a country that is not very developed yet. So,
Okay, well, thank you indeed, Petra. Jerry, I'm going to
Good
move on
evening.
a little bit because of timing,
Hello,
but there
good
is somebody
evening.
with their
Good
hand
evening.
up there.
Yeah, okay.
It's
I'm
Ilya.
a doctor. I'm a doctor. I do fistula surgery in the Catholic hospital at Uyo. The hospital was established.
Is that Ilya Ogban Sunday? Is that it at the OA?
Yes,
Yes.
Go
please.
ahead, yeah, go
Yes,
ahead. You might do show us your face too there. Undo your camera and we'll spotlight you. I saw your hand was up for a while there. I was just waiting until Petra had finished. And then after this we might call in Lara. Thank you indeed.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like
Doctor.
I said, I work with the Mission Hospital, the Catholic hospital in Uyo that was established by Dr. Ann Ward. So I will just speak briefly about prevention and also some of the issues that have been raised before. I think we're not doing enough on prevention. Like the doctor, my colleague mentioned, with Pathograph, we could do a lot to prevent, fistulas. But in addition to Pathograph, because these women don't deliver in the hospital where Pathographs are often used, they deliver at home. So what we need to teach the midwives is to insert catheter. Just inserting a Foley's catheter alone after a woman has had prolonged obstructed labor has the capacity to significantly reduce the burden of obstetric fistula. Just passing a catheter for a woman who has had a difficult labor, that alone. I remember the Catholic Church in Anambra State. There was a woman who had fistula before the Nigerian Civil War. She was the last person to come to church and the first person to leave the church. And the Reverend Father was able to bring her to us, and we were able to repair the fistula. Because of the stigma, she was actually staying at the outskirts of the community in the bush. This is a real story. Living alone, secluded in the bush, the last person to come to church and the first person to leave. But the Reverend Father was able to bring her, and after about 50 years of suffering from the scourge, she was okay. And I wept because the fistula did not take up to 30 minutes to repair, and she lived with the scourge for more than about 50 years.
Wow.
So I think we need to do a lot more on prevention than we're currently doing now, by passing a catheter and advocating to nurses and midwives to always do that. It will go a long way. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for your super input there, and we're very grateful to everybody who's taken part. Jerry, thank you indeed, and Shane, thanks for fielding those questions. If it's okay with you, for the sake of time, I'm going to move on a little bit.